too. I'm gonna make mac and cheese really quick and then I'll go upstairs. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Please, TikTok, tell me what my toxic trait is.
How do I get a thing in the background?
Oh, you have like a notes app on your phone or something?
I don't know. Probably make something in Canva real quick.
Yep.
I have like Instagram, Facebook posts. I don't know.
There should be a TikTok one. Do your story. Will be fine. Just do blank. Do text. Add a heading.
Okay.
That has to be something bad. You know it is. Okay, so move that up so that it'll be like above your head.
Maybe we'll
pull it down just a little bit. Yep, and then you can change the font.
Let's change it to like that color.
You could also, if you wanted one of these fonts, one of these cool ones, you could pick one of those.
Maybe this one?
Sure. I'll just type it in there instead. Or you can copy paste.
Yeah.
What the hell? Leave it just like that.
Just a huge fucking mess. Why are you being dumb? Okay, 90.
You can also just grab a corner and shrink it.
That won't work right.
Okay.
Didn't do the whole thing. Why? Why is this thing being so stupid?
I don't know. And I would probably make the background black for the whole post.
Oh, that turned out weird. Oh. Yeah. Okay.
You can do it a couple different ways. You could do.
Oh, here, I'll do it like this. What is it? Elements. Shapes.
Yeah.
Or just keep it pink.
Good.
It's too pink.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Now, download. Above that. In the purple.
Yeah. Just download it?
PNG should be fine. Yep. And then I dump it in Messenger to yourself so you can.
Yeah. It's okay. Nobody's here yet. Is that you? Or is this somebody else?
I'm not in the chat.
Hi, whoever's lurking.
It might be Mom or Katie.
Just getting started. Give me 1 sec. Or if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Will you grab me a water bottle?
Yep.
Here we go. Here we go. How do I do a background?
Green screen. So you go to effects and then green screen.
Oh, there it is. Oh, they're gone. Well, that's weird.
Oh, it is weird.
Don't know that I like that one. This one's all like,
What is it?
I don't know. It's weird. It's like passing through.
Oh, I kind of like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Might be too much going on.
No, I'd keep it as simple as possible.
I could be a ghost.
Not too bad.
I'm a ghost. Why is it doing the white outline? I don't like that. Can't I just get like a normal? Is this it? There we go. Okay, going live.
Okay.
Yeah. Hello. Welcome. Welcome to the internet. Have a look around. I am live on YouTube. If anybody likes to join me, feel free to ask questions. We're talking neuroscience and other weird stuff in psychology.
But you'll also field questions on TikTok, right?
I can do that.
That's fair.
Yeah, if anybody has questions on TikTok, feel free to ask away. There are not very many things I won't talk about. Aw, thanks for the likes. Yeah, so I am working on my YouTube channel right now. I have a couple of them. You like the red vibe? Yeah. I have a couple of channels right now. I have the Jack of All Trades, which I'm live right now on. And I have another channel that's coming, but I'm not quite ready to announce it yet. But I am making content for it. It is going to be a strictly neuroscience channel with an associated website. And it's going to be filled with learning tools for everybody. So people can just go there and learn about neuroscience for free. Hopefully it'll work as a nice study aid for people that want to go to college and learn about the brain, because I know some of these concepts can be a little bit uh, hard to learn. They're very dense, dense material. How's the sound quality? Somebody let me know how my sound is.
That sounds good.
So I'm live on YouTube right now. I think that going live, um, I did get a new setup. Yeah, I got a new computer, got a camera, got my mic. Yeah, I've got, it's nothing special. It's a blue snowball. It'll work for now. Um, Working on some content for this channel, my other channel, podcast. It's been kind of slow going because I also work full time. Um, yeah, so I'm just trying to figure out where to go next, what to do next. But I think I've got a solid idea. I've got some stuff made up in the works and pretty much ready to go. I'm going to do some filming tonight and make some videos, upload them to this new channel, and then announce the new channel. And it will be solidly neuroscience. I have been working on a lot of skills. I've been developing a lot of skills with just using animations and stuff like that, trying to figure that out. I'm still very new to it, so my stuff is by no means like high quality, but
Well, it is high quality.
it'll become higher quality as time goes by. I don't know. Maybe you'll be able to check it out and let me know. What do you think about it? Is it, too cheesy, or does it look good? Is it just right, or is there something you would change about it? I'll likely come and ask you and see what your opinions are. But I did come on here last week. I was live on YouTube, and I had a bunch of people asking me questions, and I was asking them questions about, what kind of things would you like to see with a new website and a new YouTube channel? And I got a ton of helpful feedback from people. And so I'm really excited about that because I have a really good place to start, a base to work with. Yeah. Hopefully I'll be able to make some fun, interesting, entertaining content that's also educational and free. For people that want to go into the field of neuroscience and learn what that is. A lot of people don't even know what neuroscience is, right? People don't know what it takes to study the brain, or the fact that you don't have to be in a specific field to study the brain. You can be in all sorts of fields to study the brain, right? You can be in chemistry. You can be, it doesn't matter what your interests are. They all kind of fit under this giant umbrella, because you could be a psychologist like me. I care about people's thought processes. I care about how they perceive things, right? I'm very interested in people's systems, right? How are you seeing? How are you hearing? How are you feeling? What is your pain level like? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? These kind of things. Other people are more interested in like deeper cognition, right? And learning and memory. It's a huge thing in neuroscience. You might be a chemist. You might be into molecular biology or just any biology. You might be into physics. We need people in physics because people in physics are usually the people that build the equipment we use to study the brain, right? We use a lot of imaging equipment, fMRIs and stuff like that. That requires a good deal of physical knowledge, right? So that we can build that kind of stuff. So you'll find that in neuroscience labs all over the world, there is a great deal of collaboration among the sciences. Yeah, that's my wife Harmony in the back. If anybody's wondering, she's just
Sorry.
she's just making mac and cheese. I know those on YouTube or on TikTok can't see. Yeah, so I'm making some new videos. They're going to take people through the basics of biopsychology, which is kind of like the essence of behavioral neuroscience. And I made a first video. It's not quite up yet. It's not made yet. I'm making it tonight, but I have everything ready to go. I'll probably film it tonight and then do some editing tomorrow before releasing it. And it's going to go over the history of neuroscience. Like, when did people even start studying the brain? Which is some pretty interesting stuff, because for the mass majority of the length of time that humans have been alive, we did not care about the brain. We didn't even think it was anything important. We would just not think about it. We thought the other organs were really important, especially the heart. Everybody thought the heart was where your feelings came from. Your heart was where your thoughts came from. That's what everybody thought. And when it came to the brain, it was like, who cares about that organ? Just throw it out. Some people were like, eat it. It's tasty. It smells like bacon when you cook it. That's a true thing. The brain smells and tastes like bacon, apparently. I have not tried it. I don't think I would. I might. I don't know. Don't want to get kuru. Your chances are real low, but they're never zero. So, yeah. I'm going to kind of take people through some of that stuff. Like, when did we start caring about the brain? When did we stop? When did we start caring about the thought process? And then when did we switch from the thought process being about the heart to the brain, right? Because initially we thought the brain was a cooler for hot blood coming from the heart, which is really a weird idea. Although the brain does look a little bit like a radiator, so I guess I could see where that thought process came from. Yeah, so I don't know. I think it'll be a fun video. I'm going to add some animations and just edit it and see how it goes. Hopefully y'all like it. Or maybe it'll look dumb. I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out together. Yeah. Talk more about the painting. Oh, thanks for the rose. Painting. What painting? Your arm?
Michelangelo.
Oh. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, why not? I'll just talk about some of the things about the study of the brain and how we came to understand it today. And the first thing is, the ancient Egyptians, right? They thought that your other organs were more important, and they were trying to preserve their most valuable people, so that in the afterlife, these people would have what they needed to survive and do well in the afterlife, right? So the most important people were usually embalmed using like oils and salts, but they had their organs removed from their body cavity. And four of their organs specifically, they had the bowels, the liver, the stomach, and I forget what the fourth one was, but they would. I said that, but they would put them in these really ornate like alabaster jars, and they thought that's what you needed in the afterlife. You need those four organs, and then there's this fifth organ that they thought was most important. That was your heart, right? So they would actually they thought the heart was so important that they would actually preserve it inside of your body. They wouldn't even remove it. But what about the brain, right? they would actually just take a stick, like a hot rod of iron, and just shove it up into your head, swirl it around until your brain became liquefied, and pour it out of your nose. They dump it on the ground after that, going, well, it's not very important. So it's like, okay, if you guys have an afterlife, you just sent your most important people to it without a brain. Okay. But yeah, and that was a long time ago. That was like 1500 BCE, right? That was thousands of years ago. And it wouldn't be until maybe 1,000 years later, yeah, a little over 1,000 years later, that somebody started talking about the heart being the seat of the emotion, right? And if you were to look into the Bible or the Quran right now, you could try to find anywhere where it talks about the brain. It doesn't at all, which is really strange. It never talks about the brain, neither book, but they talk about the heart all the time. I am still reading comments here on TikTok if anybody has any questions. But yeah, this led to some interesting things, right? Thanks for the gift. Let's see. I'm trying to think of like maybe I should grab my notes here. If I look for my notes, I might be able to not miss interesting stuff. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So Aristotle, right? After the Egyptians, nobody talked about the brain. The Egyptians, the only thing they had to say about the brain is throw it on the ground. It's not worth shit. After the Egyptians, we had Aristotle, who was around 350 BCE, right? So he was the most prominent scientist of ancient Greece, right? What did he think about the brain? Well, he considered the heart to be the source of thought, right? He thought that our heart is where we got our thoughts and feelings, our cognitive processes came from the heart. That's what Aristotle thought. Everybody thought that. For thousands of years, everybody thought that. The ancient Egyptians even thought that, right? So it must be true. And actually, this has been such a prevalent thing that even our language today, the way we talk now, is still reminiscent of that when we call people kind-hearted, right? Or we call people heartless, right? We're in this instance, we're ascribing their personality feature to the heart. But personality traits we now know come from the brain, not the heart. In fact, if you damage the prefrontal cortex, you mess with somebody's personality pretty seriously. Look at Phineas Gage for that, right? If those who don't know who Phineas Gage is, I could probably give a quick blurb about him in a minute. So Aristotle, of course, like many other people for thousands of years, thought that the heart was where your thought processes came from. What did he think about the brain, though? Well, he actually thought that the brain was a cooler, right? He thought that the brain looked like a radiator. It's a bunch of tubes. It's not. We now know it's just like a wrinkled mesh. But to him, it looked like, this thing must be taking hot blood that's being pumped from the heart and turning it into just cooling it off the brain's cooling it off for the body. So the blood's not too hot for the body, which is kind of silly, but actually kind of cool in a weird way. I'm talking about kind of the rise of neuroscience and how we came to study the brain. So at the same time as Hippocrates, or at the same time as Aristotle was Hippocrates. Yeah. Hi, Katie. And Hippocrates and Aristotle kind of differed in their views. Hippocrates was the first person to say, actually, I don't really think that the heart is where emotion is. I think the brain is where the seat of emotion is. It makes sense because it sits right behind the eyes, right? The brain is where I'm actually at. The rest is just tools I'm using. And let's see. Yeah, by the end of the second century, or by the time the second century rolled around, I should say, is when Hippocrates' idea that was like brain centered in terms of how we think and feel and process emotions and other mental things. Um, he believed that, or his belief became widely held by everybody. Um, yeah, and so like we have at the beginning of the second century a man named Galen, who was a Greco-Roman physician. Hi. He studied the brains of gladiators, right, who fought in battle, and then they would get brain damage. They would get hit in the face with like a sword or a mace or something and get severely brain damaged. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do with this information? He noticed that some of these people that were getting hit in parts of their head started acting in similar ways to other people who got hit in the same part of their head. Is neuroscience like psychology? Well, actually, neuroscience is a broad umbrella, and psychology falls underneath that. So, like I was saying earlier, you don't have to be one thing to be a neuroscientist. The field of neuroscience is to study the brain, and what that means is that anything you can do to get at understanding the brain brings you into the field of neuroscience. So we have people who are physicists, we have people who are psychologists, people who are other types of philosophers, people who are really good at math and data analysis. We have people that are chemists, right? Because we have to understand chemical processes, biological processes. So biologists, molecular biologists, geneticists, right? We need genetics, understanding of genetics, because often in neuroscience we use genetic tools. Yeah, so I do have a master's in psychology. Yeah, so this guy Galen, though, he didn't have, at that time, they didn't really have like a very good understanding of the brain, what it even did, right? So when he's like studying all these gladiators who are suffering from brain damage, little background on neuroscience versus psychology versus neurology. Okay, I will in just a sec. So Galen, when he's studying these gladiators that are getting schwacked in the face, right? He starts to understand that people are like getting deficits, cognitive deficits. They're not able to think clearly. There's issues with their process. They might lose their ability to talk, right? Or even understand you when you talk. And so his thought, because they did not have a good understanding of working neural anatomy, was that your brain must be releasing animal spirits into the body, and your body's acting like an animal because of it, which sounds absurd now. But if you think about it at the time, based on what we know about the brain now, people who suffer from traumatic brain injuries, TBIs, people who suffer from traumatic brain injuries often have problems with impulse control. They also can be very violent, right? They can be violent towards others, and they can be violent towards themselves. And when you look at, and also, like I said before, sometimes they have deficits, right? And I'll talk about this in a second, but if you get hit in the left temporal lobe, you're going to have problems with speech processing, right? So he's looking at these gladiators that are getting whacked in the head, and all of a sudden they lose the ability to talk. They get extremely violent and wild, right? And he has no working understanding of neural anatomy. Of course, he's likely to believe, hey, maybe these people have animal spirits rushing through their body, right? Kind of silly, but it kind of makes sense for the time. Next, in the 15th and 16th centuries, we have Leonardo da Vinci. I am still reading the chat here on TikTok. Thanks, Harm. Really quick, before I move on to Leonardo da Vinci, I'll cover this question. So briefly, neuroscience is just the study of the brain, and anybody can study the brain, right? And the nervous system in general. So really the whole body, how the brain is talking to the body. That's neuroscience. When you talk about psychology, you're specifically talking about mental processes. And you don't necessarily have to be involved in the neural stuff, although you should be. That's kind of the way we feel about it now. This is the way of the future. If you understand the nervous system, you should understand the mental processes behind the nervous system. And I'll actually get to that here in a minute. But when we're talking about neurology, which is different from psychology and neuroscience, neurology is actually like a clinical study of the nervous system, in which case you are studying the nervous system so that you can treat problems with the nervous system. So that's kind of like a brief. Yeah, you can think of neuroscience as just understanding the nervous system. Psychology is understanding the mind and how it arises because of the nervous system. Neurology is like a clinical perspective on the nervous system. Anyway, moving on to Da Vinci. Da Vinci is still really well known for his beautiful schematics that he drew. Right, he draws all these really beautiful pictures, he drew all these really beautiful pictures. And he was not only an artist but also a scientist, and so he drew what he observed of the human brain. And his drawings were really, really awesome. They were very detailed. The problem was they really didn't understand anatomy, and because of the religious dogma at the time, it was kind of illegal to do that. So, what it came down to is the mind is a gift from God, right? Is what they would say. And even Da Vinci would say. There's no point asking other questions about it. I don't know if you posted the link, but it did not show up in the chat. Anyway, around the same time as Da Vinci came Michelangelo. And Michelangelo is the gentleman who is famous for painting the Sistine Chapel. And of course, everybody knows that one really famous picture, that image of Michelangelo painted an image of God reaching out and touching his finger to the finger of man, right? And what's really interesting is if you actually take this image and put it next to a brain, the image of God looks a lot like a human brain. You can see the prefrontal cortex where his finger is leaving, right, which is like the place of reason. And you can see where his legs are going to the brainstem. And also behind him is like this wavy kind of curtain. And you can see that it's wrinkly. And of course, it's like obvious to me, I've seen enough brains, that I know that this wrinkly curtain is supposed to represent the cerebellum, right, which is important for motor function. What's really funny is like this kind of goes against God at the time. And so, it's often theorized that in secret he was practicing dissection on cadavers. Thanks, Just Larry. I'm glad you're enjoying it. So not too long after Da Vinci and Michelangelo came Descartes, who we owe a great deal of respect to Descartes for his contributions to math and science, right? But yeah, he went on to propose that the human mind, or rather the human behavior, represented the workings of a machine, right? And so, because he said human behavior is a lot like a machine, the reason he said this is because of human reflexes, right? So, and in a lot of ways, our reflexes are mechanistic. I have circuitry that goes from my brain to my spinal cord, from my spinal cord to my extremity, from my extremity back to my spinal cord, and then from my spinal cord back to my brain. There's a whole circuit that follows this logic. But there's another circuit. It's the same circuit, but at the point where the circuit leaves my spine and goes to the extremity, and then leaves the extremity and comes back to the spine, it also talks back to the extremity again and back to the spine again. And it constantly feeds back and forth this way. So even though some information is getting to the brain, much quicker information is just going back and forth between the spine and the extremity. And so what is evolutionarily beneficial to about this is that if I touch a surface that is dangerous to me, say it's really hot, I feel it's hot before I've perceived that it's hot. My body pulls back before I've had time to say ouch, right? And so Descartes went on to say, hey, the body or behavior acts more like a machine, which is part of the body, right? And he proposed the theory of dualism. Okay, so he thought there's the material body, which is like a machine, and then there's the immaterial mind, right? And the brain was part of the material body, but the immaterial mind was part of the spirit, which was given to you by God. Again, a lot of religious dogma led everybody to all their ideals at that time. Most of our current understanding about how the brain works actually comes from studying correlations between brain damage, right, and to various parts of the brain, and then the resulting behaviors or lack of behaviors because of that brain damage. And much of this work we can attribute to an English physician by the name of Thomas Willis. So Thomas Willis sat and looked at a ton of patients with a ton of different types of head trauma, and he noticed their symptoms, wrote them down, and he compared them and said, hey, look, whenever someone gets hit in the front of the head, this sort of stuff happens. Whenever somebody gets hit in the side of the head, this sort of stuff happens. Whenever somebody gets hit in the back of the head, this sort of stuff happens, right? So he's the one to kind of like set that process in motion. And that's been largely beneficial to clinicians, psychologists, and otherwise. But it was around this time in the 1800s, in the early 1800s, that people started taking this idea, which was a really good idea, and then going wild with it in a really negative way. And so one of the things that resulted because of that was phrenology, which was like it was just a fad, right? A fad for the time. It was really popular. The reason it was so widely popular is because it corresponded with this idea that different specific parts of the brain were related to different behaviors. And it was really popular belief. So people were like, okay, this phrenology kind of helps to explain this. I like this. What phrenology is, practicing phrenologists would feel the bumps and grooves of your head and then determine your personality based on those bumps and grooves. It probably doesn't take a genius to like really realize that this is bullshit right away, but it took people a lot of years before they figured out, oh, you can't actually do this. So of course it's really stupid, but it did give rise to one really important concept, and that is the concept of localization of function. Is there anything in neuroscience today that you think might be like believing in the spirit being from God or something along those lines being part of our accepted view of the brain today? Like something big about our understanding of the brain that has the potential to be completely incorrect. So I'm not sure what you're asking, but let me restate what I think you're asking. Is kind of like how we used to think the spirit came from God, right? And for many, many thousands of years, that was just the default. And now we're like, probably not, though. and you're saying, "Hi, Heather," and you're saying, "Is there anything like that today where everybody's just widely accepting this thing, and it could be wrong?" And my answer is, I don't know. I don't know, but it's totally possible. And the reason I don't know is because we've already whittled down our knowledge by this point, because we had a technological boom and a knowledge boom in the last 100 years, right? We've advanced our knowledge so much that it's hard to debate some of the stuff. Now we're getting into nitpicky little stuff, right? It's hard to debate the bigger things, but there are certain things that are, like, for instance, the one main one that I always think about, although this is getting out of the field of neuroscience, is the theory of gravity, right? Um, because we all know that gravity is a law, right? It works every time. The more mass, the more gravity. But I think the mechanism behind why that is sometimes still pretty unknown. Uh, if we're thinking about neuroscience, love, like maybe consciousness. Yeah. Well, consciousness is a hard one. It's hard to compare consciousness to that idea because consciousness is just straight up unknown. And people want to believe they know what consciousness is. We don't. We really don't. And some people don't even believe consciousness to be like an actual thing. Some people believe consciousness to just be a little tiny part of your brain that wakes up sometimes when it's important for you to be awake, which is why, oftentimes people drive from point A to point B and don't remember the trip, is because if you've made that trip a million times, there's no point in registering any novel information because there's nothing there, right? Why even be awake for that? You're just asleep at the wheel, so to speak. Um, so I don't know. There are a lot of theories about consciousness. And actually, one of the reasons why consciousness is such a difficult topic to talk about is because there are so many theories about consciousness. Some people think that there is a single theory for consciousness. Other people argue that there are 3 types of consciousness, and they all stem from different things. Other people argue that there are 8 types of consciousness, all stemming from different things. Other people argue that there are even more than 8 types of consciousness, and they stem from the same things but done differently. And some stem from different things, right? So it's like, man, we really got to figure something out. The particles. What about particles? Anyway, I'm going to continue on. Good question. Thank you. What do I think consciousness is? I just think it's, I don't know. I think that consciousness is a byproduct. Here's what I think. I think that when an animal has a tool that allows it to introspect, meaning it allows the animal to look at itself. No, that's okay. Don't be sorry. I'm happy to answer questions. If an animal has a tool that allows it to observe itself, it on some level has that consciousness about itself. I'm wounded, right? I'm conscious of my wound that I have, right? Simple as that. But when you get to higher order animals, you start to getting into an idea of higher order consciousness. Some people don't even believe other animals besides humans have consciousness. Other people argue that animals have different levels of consciousness depending on how complex the animal's behavior is, right? Which kind of makes sense to me. Again, I'm going to say, as the animal is better at introspection, as it's better to observe and pick up data about itself and make adjustments about its own behavior or analyze itself, the better its consciousness likely is, right? Because it's becoming self-conscious, self-aware. And humans, I think humans have so many of these internal states that they manifest as an I am awake. I've woken up and I'm here, right? And the thing is that I'm not always here. Sometimes people go, "Hey, Jared, wake up. What are you doing? You're zoning off." Oh, sorry, I was just off in La La Land. I wasn't here because I didn't need to be, because everything's the same as it always is. It's not until something novel, something unpredictable, or something startling or surprising or interesting happens that the brain goes, "Oh, I actually can't handle this on my own. I need to wake up the CEO, the guy who's really good at making these decisions," right? And the reason this guy is really good at making these decisions is because he is the compilation of all these tools that allows him to introspect. Let's wake him up. And then I wake up and I go, "Oh, I'm here," right? And then my brain, which did all this wonderful bullshit without me, I wake up and take credit for all of it, right? As though I'm the one who did it. When really, of course it is all me, but my subconscious processes were doing it without me the whole time, right? Uh, so, like, to put it a little more simply, I think that consciousness, I suspect, might just be a byproduct of taking all these really good tools at introspection and cramming them into one part of the brain. And then when you ignite that part of the brain, when you wake it up, that's when you wake up. The you that says, "I am me and I exist and I'm separate from all other things." Hey, what's up, Manchuria Moore? It's good to see you. You think we is better? Why? I'm just curious. Why do you think we is better? And are you talking like from a sociological perspective? So self-actualization is consciousness? No, I would say they're different things. I don't think that you have to self-actualize in order to become conscious. I do think that some people believe, and I may ascribe to this belief, that, and I say may because I haven't made a decision about this yet. We don't have enough data or an ability to prove this. But there are some who suspect that as you self-actualize, your level of consciousness increases. That's one of the theories of consciousness. And that's also in line with the idea that sometimes animals can be conscious, but their level of consciousness depends on their tools. Does that make sense? How? How what? How do we self-actualize? How do we become conscious? How do we become more conscious? Let's see if I can shrink this down. I'm going to pull some stuff up on my computer. I'm going to make things a little easier. Make things a little easier. Okay. How does self-actualization become consciousness? Okay. Yeah. Great question. So, it's hard to say because we don't quite know what consciousness is, right? But one could theorize that if you are at a level of consciousness and it gives you a tool and you can somehow surpass the bounds of that tool. Let me just think for a second for a good example. It's kind of like when you're a baby and you're learning, you see everybody walking around you and you're just like, I have no idea how they're all walking. That's amazing. I would love to be able to do that. It looks fun, but I have no idea how to do that. The first thing you have to do is build up the muscle strength, right? Once you've built up your muscle strength, you can start to pick yourself up. Then you have to have enough balance to be able to stand yourself up. Then you have to have enough balance to be able to stand yourself up without a prop, right? Then you have to be able to start taking steps, and you'll have to fall down a few times, right? And you're going through this process of learning how to walk, right? Similarly, your mind can go through another process of kind of learning how to walk too. So, a good example is mathematics, right? You can be really good at calculus, right? But you're not going to be any good at calculus if you don't already have an understanding of algebra and geometry and trigonometry. You need to understand all three of those things before you can do calculus, right? And if you're going to do, trigonometry or geometry, you need to know algebra first. And if you're going to do basic algebra, you need to do basic mathematics first. You need to know how to add, subtract. Then you learn how to multiply. Then you learn how to divide, because by definition, division is the inverse of multiplication. And then once you get really good at those four things, then you can move on to algebra. Now we're doing more complex stuff, right? And this is a literal cognitive thought process that's happening. So once you have this new tool, you're like, oh, I'm really good at addition, subtraction, multiplication, and all of this. Now I can move on to the next thing. I'll move on to algebra. Once you can understand algebra fully, you can move on to trigonometry. Geometry is sort of like a separate thing, but related. And then you can go on to calculus. And then if you have a good working knowledge of calculus, you can move on to study physics, right? But until you get to that point of being a physicist and have already done all these things to get you to that point of being a physicist, you can sit in a room full of physicists and they'll all have a conversation and it will sound like alien to you. You'll have no idea what they're talking about. One could argue that they are at a higher state of consciousness than you are because you lack the necessary cognitive tools to get to that point. You couldn't comment. That's really weird. I wonder why you couldn't comment. That's not good. I'll have to look into that. I did put it so that anybody could comment in the public. So maybe we can figure that out together. So metaphysical consciousness is what splits us from animals. Well, I mean, in the same train, if an animal lacks the capacity to be able to, for instance, dogs can see, right? Everybody knows dogs can see, unless they have some sort of underlying condition that doesn't allow them to see. Dogs have the capacity for vision, right? But they don't really see color vision very well. Some of them do. They can perceive some colors, but a lot of what they see is not to the extent that we can see. There are other animals that can see way better than we can. But my point is that because a dog sees differently than I see, that dog experiences life differently than I do. And another thing is the dog never questions, hey, do I look dumb in this little sweater my mom put me in? I questioned that all the time as a child. And so there's a fundamental difference in how we're perceiving life, right? A dog doesn't question its ability to do something. It just does or doesn't do that thing. You know, in ways it's calculating, right? If it says, if you're a dachshund, you're probably going to say something like, I'm the biggest animal around and I can kill everything, despite the fact that you're like this big. But most animals, have this sort of rationalizing statistical software, is what we can call the brain, right? We have this statistical software. But most animals will go, if I run into that thing, do I think I can kill it or do I think it'll kill me? And if I think it'll kill me, I'm going to take off. I'm not going to stay here, right? But if I run into it and I think I can kill that and eat it and that will be good food for me, then I'm going to go after it, right? These are different types of decisions that humans used to make a long time ago. We don't really make these kind of decisions anymore. We kind of do, right? Do I think I'm going to get the job or not? Is it worth it for me to put that effort in or not? But the difference is I'm not just making a split-second decision. Sometimes humans have to do that too. But I'm not going to get into all that. But like most of the time, it's like if I'm looking for a job, I don't have to apply now. What kind of job do I want? Oh, do I think I'll get that job? No, but do I think I could get that job if I go get these skills first? Maybe. So maybe I'll go get those skills first, right? The self-analysis is at a different state, right? I'm at a different state of awareness. A dog can't really maintain that because a dog doesn't really have very good long-term memory or even short-term memory. They're very, yeah, they're good at learning things that are very rewarding, and that's about it. What do I think about shared consciousness? So, what you're calling telepathy, I do not think is telepathy in the traditional sense. Let me tell you, we do have telepathy, and you use it every day, and we don't think it's as amazing as it is. Let me tell you what telepathy is. It's speech. Okay? Think about this. I have a thought that is completely in my brain, and I want you to know that thought. So what I did was I moved my mouth and pushed air out of my throat and moved my vocal cords in such a coordinated fashion that I changed the physical waves of the air. And these physical waves of the air reached my cell phone. And my cell phone converted that into an electrical signal. And then that electrical signal was converted into a different type of wave that was sent off to a satellite. Literal wave pulses into the air off into a satellite. Actually, it was more like off to my modem and then off to a satellite. Or rather, to my modem, to a tower, to a satellite, back to another tower, back to your modem, back to you, your cell phone. And then the wave transmitted from your cell phone came back to your ear, passed through your cochlea, landed somewhere in your cochlea, and different waves are landing in different parts of your cochlea, and your cochlea is taking all that neural information, bringing it into your temporal lobe, and you are interpreting it as sound. And you're interpreting this sound in such a specified way that you're able to understand what I'm telling you, which is what is in my mind. I have taken a thing that is in my mind and I have put it into your mind by passing it through the air. In the traditional sense, I guess that's not telepathy, but really it is telepathy if you think about it. And thanks. I'm glad you like my answers. Right. But when you talk about a shared consciousness, right, this is different to me. I don't think that we have telepathy with one another. The thing is that humans are really good statisticians, like I've been saying, right? We're really good at picking up data that we don't even realize we're picking up. Our subconscious does it for you. This is why sometimes you think, man, I really haven't talked to Paul in a while. It's been like 4 years. And then Paul calls you the next day, or maybe that day, like maybe that same hour. And you're like, that was super creepy. Hey, Paul, I was just thinking about you, right? And the thing is that's because you and Paul's relationship is cyclical. Your relationship with everybody is cyclical. You're statisticians. You're predicting. You're making predictions constantly about what is the kind of effort I have to put into this relationship with this person. How consistent is this person going to be with me? Right? And it's important for us to make these judgments, especially when we're trying to get a job, right? How comfortable do I think I'm going to be with this boss? Or how likely is it that I'm going to be able to trust my coworkers? How regular is everybody going to be? You know, and you'll start picking up on things. Oh, crap, it's Tuesday. Well, why do I hate Tuesdays? Because Jeff always shows up 10 minutes late and I have to open up for him, right? Like, we pick up patterns in people. And there's another thing going into effect, but this is the main one that I think is that, you know, we're so good at picking up these patterns that we even pick up patterns of thought. Thanks for the rose. So when we spend enough time with somebody, it's almost like they can just look at us and we know what they're thinking. And that's because we're thinking the same thing because we're so in sync with our patterns of thinking. The other thing is we have things like laws and rules, right? We have spoken and unspoken laws in which people are supposed to act, right? And you and I make an agreement that we will act on these rules. I'm not going to speed. When I'm driving is a really good example of this. I'm not going to speed when I'm driving. I got my license, which says that I'm going to stop at every stop sign. right? If there's a red light, I'm going to stop at it, and then I'm going to go if I'm turning right, if it's safe to do so, right? I'm going to use my blinker when I'm turning, and assuming that everybody abides by these laws, and they don't, right? Usually assholes, and these kind of people are usually kind of detracted from the rest of society. They seem to think they're better than everybody else, and they don't really get along with other people. Well, part of that is because they don't understand other people, and other people don't understand them because they're inconsistent, you know? So the thing is if I always, I personally, I've made the decision that if I get to a stop sign, I will stop at it. If nobody else is around, the streets are entirely empty, there are no police, and there's a stop sign there, I will still make the conscious effort to stop at that stop sign because I said I would do that. That's it. And you know me so well, maybe you don't, but if you do know me so well, you know that I'm a man of my word. And so because I said that I will stop at this stop sign, I'm going to do it. So you know that wherever I'm at, you can predict I'm probably going to stop at that stop sign. Thanks for the rose. This being the case, if you know me, then you are consciously connected to me. We have a shared consciousness in this way. You already know what I'm going to do. It's similar to when I watch you, turn a blinker light on. You're signaling to me that you're about to turn. I know what you're going to do. We have this shared consciousness. But if you don't turn your blinker on and you start slowing down where there is a road, I'm going to assume you're going to turn there even though you haven't turned on your blinker because I still have a perceived consciousness with you. What is up? Yeah, we're doing good. I'm just answering questions. I was talking a little bit about a video that I'm making. I actually think I need to take like a quick little break just to run to the restroom really quick. I will be right back. Sorry. Okay, I'm back. Body language. Kind of, right? But like, again, we're making an assumption here. We're making an assumption. So the shared consciousness must be something that we are sharing, right? Sorry, I left you. I'm back. So I think the idea is if you're using body language, I know this. Hang on one sec. Sorry. 1 second. I'm right here. I didn't leave. I'm just off camera. Hang on. Okay. So if you're using body language to talk to somebody, right? You're not trying to on purpose necessarily. And maybe this is even a shared unconsciousness, right? Sometimes you're really uncomfortable and you don't realize that you're acting really uncomfortable, right? So it might be a shared unconsciousness, a shared awkwardness. But the thing is that other person can only be conscious or subconscious of your body language if they have the capacity to understand and recognize your body language, right? And some people are not good at that, right? Like people who are autistic are not good at that at all. They don't pick up on these kind of things. Jim Can't Swim has great interrogation videos that read about it. That's interesting. I've never heard of that person. I'll look into it. Uh, I know a lot of people also look into things like micro expressions, things like that. Yeah. You can think of like somebody who can't pick up on body language as the same as like sign language, right? I can't understand sign language. I know you're trying to talk to me. I don't know what you're trying to say. But with body language, it might be so subtle that I don't even realize you're saying anything at all. In that case, we do not have a shared consciousness, right? In fact, our consciousnesses are quite, divergent. It's a YouTube channel based on true crime. That sounds like it's right up Harmony's alley. She'll have to check that out. So you think people can read minds? No, I don't. I think that there is scientific equipment that allows us to kind of know what you're thinking about if you're willing to sit still long enough, right? But in terms of like actually reading someone's mind, I think it's possible if you know that person to a T that you will be able to predict what they're thinking. I think your ability to predict what another person's thinking can increase to such a point that you're almost right 100% of the time. But that would require you to know that individual up and down, back and forth for years, right? You'd have to be really in tune with them. You think it's possible between blood relatives? Okay, let me share this with you. This is unscientific, and now I'm switching out of Jacko stack mode or neural jack or whatever we're doing here. Jacko all trades. I'm just gonna like get out of my scientist brain. Okay. Now we're just having fun. Okay. Scientist brain's out of here. We're just having fun. I have a twin brother, and a long time ago, before I was in school, I worked at a gas station. And I worked in a gas station in Montana. And my twin brother lived in Oregon at the time. And I was working when all of a sudden I got the worst pain of my life in my left leg. And it was so bad that I physically could not stand. And I'm trying to ring people up, and I'm like gimping. I'm like limping on my leg. I can't let it touch the ground. Knowing what I know now, it's probably related to something else. But at that time, I'm like, my leg, I don't know what I did to it. Am I going to die? Like, what's happening? And it finally, after a while, about an hour, goes away. It just suddenly just goes away. Worst pain of my life. And then I'm like, I got this weird feeling like I should call my brother. I hadn't talked to him in months. It had been at least 4 or 5 months since I last talked to him. I'm like, I should really call that guy. And before my shift ended, about 15 minutes before my shift ended, he called me and he was crying. And I'm like, oh man, what's going on? And he's like really upset about something. I'm like, dude, I wish I could talk to you, but I'm at work, but I'm almost done with my shift. Can I call you back? So I finish my shift and then I call him back and he's still crying. I'm like, dude, what's wrong? What's happening? I was just thinking about you. And he goes, oh man, I was walking in Portland or wherever he was. And he's like, some people got out of a car with a baseball bat and hit him in the leg. And they hit him and like broke his ankle right where my leg was like killing me, right? So it was super weird that happened. And another time I thought I was having a heart attack. And I ended up going to the hospital. They treated me like I was having a heart attack because I looked like I was having the symptoms of a heart attack. And they got the defibrillator out and everything. They were ready to go. And then all of a sudden I was just fine. It was like 20 minutes into it. It stopped. And everybody was looking at me real weird. They're like, what the hell? I just sat up and I'm like, I feel better now. This is weird. And they checked my blood. They're like, well, you couldn't have had a heart attack because all your proteins are fine. You're doing fine. And I was like, man, that's the craziest thing. I don't know what to say or do. Like, and I was like 23 at the time, 23 or 24. It was like, it did not make sense for me to have a heart attack. But I pseudoscience mode activated, correct, which I hate. But sometimes stories are just interesting. Who knows? Maybe there's an explanation other than, but we don't know. Anyway, I go, man, I should really call my mom and let her know what happened. So I try calling her, and she doesn't answer. And I'm like, oh, that's okay. She'll probably get back to me sometime. She usually calls me back pretty quickly. And she called me back the next day and she's like, sorry, I didn't answer. I'm in the hospital right now. And I'm like, well, what are you in the hospital for? I was just in the hospital. She's like, I just had another heart attack. I was like, oh my God, what the hell? But like, most likely it was just weird coincidences. They happen all the time. It's crazy, yeah. How mothers can carry the genetic material of their children. I have not heard of that. I've heard of how their children carry their genetic material. Human factors psychology. What is that? Is that a book? Looks like there's a book on it. A collection of contemporary applications of psychological insights into practical human factors issues. Topics are arranged largely according to an information processing energetic approach to human behavior. Consideration is also given to human computer interaction and organizational design. Improving products, equipment, machines, and environments to complement human capabilities and maximize performance and safety. Oh yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. I don't know how I feel about this. I feel like it's a good thing, but it's definitely misused by capitalism, right? More to our genes than we know. That's true. Your genes hang on to a lot of shit from your ancestors. You actually have your ancestors' genetics in there. And what that means is every disease they've ever gone through, every virus they've ever picked up, all of that stuff, um, all of it, it's there. You have your ancestors' DNA, and it has all those weird things, those weird quirky things built into it. Most of it inactive, but if you've ever wondered how like a disease gets started, oftentimes like the cold, right? We talk about a common cold, but it's usually like who really knows what it is. Or like the flu. It's like, yeah, but who really knows, right? Oftentimes the virus came from a person whose genes just happened to mutate the right way to get it going in the first place, because they already had the genes for it because of way long, long ago, or their ancestor had the genes for it. Yeah, the problem I have with human factors psychology, that idea, is that it very much stems from uh, it. Okay, first I'll preface this with saying it's a good thing. It is. I think that it's good to maximize and complement human efficiency, right? But the problem is that anybody who wants to give money to that usually wants to exploit the human being that they're making more efficient. Hi, Greedy Vices. It's good to see you. Long time no see. I'm on YouTube. And also I'm here, I guess. I was meant to just go live on YouTube, but it was recommended to me to go live here too. And I'm getting a lot of chat here. Yes, we're all happy Greedy Vices is here. Yeah, so the thing is about human factor psychology is that it's all well and good, it's dandy even, but not in a society that doesn't want to pay people, right? Because you're making people really efficient, but we're not willing to pay them for them being efficient. And then the other thing is in theory, you should make people more efficient so that we need less of them, right? Pay them a lot more. I only need you to work 4 hours a week, and I'll pay you a really good living wage where you can have a house, you can raise kids, you can have a couple of cars. That would be like the way to do it. But our society, at least in the US, does not do this. says. Our society in the US says, I'm going to make you maximally efficient. I'm only going to train you because I don't want to expend resources to train anybody else. You're not going to work 40 hours a week. You're going to work, well, then there's other dynamics coming into play. Because then you have to think, okay, how do I never pay you overtime? Right? How do I have the least amount of employees, make them work the most amount of hours without getting benefits or overtime? Right? And how do I make them more efficient so that it maximizes my gain? Right? That's just the way that the US works. It's really awful. We really need to stop that. Like now. I think people are starting to wake up to that. Yeah, fellow weird art maker. That is definitely harm. Long-term effects of COVID. Yeah, I've heard a lot of things. I'm not really sure about them. I don't know what causes them. There are different. Obviously, a lot of it's like cardiovascular. A lot of it has to do with respiration and respiratory problems. When you have respiratory problems, you have problems getting oxygen to the body. You have problems getting oxygen to the body. You have problems feeding those parts of the body. And if you have a problem feeding that part of the body tends to kind of get fucked up and die. What do you know about prosmia? Prosmia is like messing up your sense of smell, right? Which we all know by now is like a well-known side effect of COVID, right? The reason this happens is because you have olfactory sensory neurons inside of your nose. These olfactory sensory neurons have their little dendrites sticking out inside of the skin of your nose, and they're picking up chemicals to smell. These odorants, or what they call it, these smellable chemicals. These odorants come into contact with these receptors, these olfactory sensory neurons, and they send that information up to the brain, to the olfactory bulbs, right? I had a drawing of this somewhere. Anyway, so normally when you receive a smell, it goes to these OSNs, the olfactory sensory neurons, the OSNs, into your nose, and then it goes up to the olfactory bulbs for processing information about the quality of the smell. And the problem with COVID is it doesn't really attack these. So at first we're like, why is it affecting people's smell? The olfactory sensory neurons are fine. But they're not actually fine. What happens is it attacks the ACE proteins, which again are not in olfactory sensory neurons. So it's like, why is this affecting our smell? But the ACE proteins are in astrocytes. Astrocytes are very important glial cells, right? They're very important for the health of your other cells. Astrocytes direct blood flow, right? Where do we need oxygen? Well, we need it where it's needed most, where it's most active. So send oxygen there. Also, bring nutrition. Also, take out garbage, right? We're excreting material, get rid of it, right? All these different things to keep these cells' communication efficient. And the problem is that COVID attacks this ACE protein that's located on these astrocytes. These astrocytes then begin dying. So your little helper cells that are telling all the neurons how to survive are dying. So these neurons, the olfactory sensory neurons in your nose, don't know how to communicate anymore because the cells that are supposed to be helping them metabolize and stuff are no longer there. And in some people, astrocytes will come back because they're one of the rare cells that can actually be repaired and replaced in the nervous system. But neurons in the nervous system, once they're dead, they're gone. Other than two specific areas, one of them happens to be in the olfactory bulbs, not the OSNs. So, if you're one of those people who is unfortunate enough that their astrocytes in their nose have died and are not coming back. You have the capacity. You have the capacity to receive the information, but your receptor is not working properly. Like the brain fog. And for that same reason, right? If you're literally, it's that same reason, to my knowledge. Well, at the beginning of this live, I was talking about a video that I'm making on a brief history of neuroscience and how we came to study the brain. I can continue talking about that. It is interesting stuff. I think I ended with Da Vinci, who proposed the idea of dualism, right? So he said the body is material, and therefore behavior is mechanistic and material, and therefore human behavior cannot come from the spirit. Body's separate from the spirit. Spirit's an immaterial mind, or the immaterial spirit. So he believed in dualism. You have the body, and then you have the mind. The brain is part of the body. The mind is like of the spirit, and therefore of God, or something. Oh, and then I talked about how most of our current knowledge actually came from Thomas Willis, who was studying brain damage in specific regions of the brain and how that correlates to behavioral differences in humans. And then we talked about the pseudoscience phrenology, right? How that became a popular fad based on Thomas Willis's findings, although it was very quickly realized to be baloney. But although, of course, phrenology is a bunch of bullshit, but it did give rise to the idea of localization of function, which is a very important concept in neuroscience, because that's basically what all our clinical applications are aimed at. Meaning localization of function, meaning very specific parts of the brain help to perform very specific behaviors or output very specific behaviors. Which sounds really nice. It is helpful to think of the brain in this way, but we know now that there are many exceptions to this, especially with patients who suffer from traumatic brain injuries and have to relearn things. Thanks for the likes. Let's see. So I'm going to give you two examples. And for those who weren't here earlier, I am actually going to post a video about this on YouTube, so feel free to watch that later. I'm going to try to record it tonight, hopefully get it edited tonight or tomorrow and out. But I'm going to give you two pieces of evidence for the concept of localization of function. The first one is called Broca's area. Okay. This was discovered by Paul Broca, who studied patients that had suffered brain damage to their left temporal lobe, right? So the left hemisphere of the brain, right around this region. Okay. Patients who were getting hit here. He was studying them. And he realized that patients who got hit specifically like right here. Let's see if I can grab my brain. Oh, I don't know where my brain is. I know my brain is bouncing around somewhere. Harm's going to bring me the brain. Bring me the brain! Yeah, I don't know where it is.
Are you reading your YouTube chat?
Oh. Material gore. Oh, jeez.
I don't think phrenology is common knowledge.
You don't think so?
At least not that word for it. I think people know if you explain it.
Oh. You don't know where your brain is either? Oh, I'm sorry, Nelly. Same. Hi, greedy. Anyway, so here I have a brain. Okay. On TikTok, I think that everything is reversed. I'm not really sure. Let's see. This is the right side for me. Does this look like the right side for you? I'm not sure. Anyway, so here's the front of your brain, and here's the back of your brain where the cerebellum is. Hi, Kate Jude. So Paul Broca was studying patients who were receiving brain damage to this little region right above the temporal lobe, right in the prefrontal cortex. It's right here. It's the right side of your screen. So I guess maybe it's backwards. I'm not really sure. So this spot is known as Broca's area now. And the reason why is because his patients would have problem with speech production. Every time a patient gets hit here, just on the left side, not the right side, just the left side, they lose the ability to talk. And he had one patient who was famously known as Tan. It's always backwards, yeah. So Tan was named so Tan aptly because the only syllable he could produce was tan. You'd be like, "Hey, Tan, how are you today?" And he would go, "Tan, tan, 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 tan." And all he could say was tan, except Paul Broca did mention that he did occasionally blaspheme. So he would curse sometimes too. But other than cursing, all he could do was say tan. Satan. Okay, anyway, blaspheme, Satan. The next area is Wernicke's area, which is, what's his name? Carl Wernicke. Carl with a K. Fair, yeah. So same region, right? We're talking about the temporal lobe on the left hemisphere, not the right hemisphere, just the left, which is really strange. But right towards the back here on this like convulsion right here on the temporal lobe, patients who were getting hit there regularly had a problem with speech comprehension. And so that led to this really weird phenomenon where people would talk like they're saying regular sentences, but what would come out was absolute gibberish. It would be words and syllables all out of order, which is very interesting. So these are two examples of localization of function, right? Specifically, if you want to be able to talk, produce speech, you have to have this area intact. And if you want the ability to be able to talk in a meaningful way, make sense of what you are saying, this area needs to be able to work, right? Hopefully that makes sense. Angelo says, that's really interesting that he could curse but not say other words. Yeah, okay, I do have a weird theory about this. There's no way to prove it. But some people who suffer brain damage and cannot speak can still sing. So they can still sing the words to lyrics. They just can't produce speech, right? And there's other weirder examples, but just sticking with this to keep things simple. Yeah, punny. It might be that singing is more of a motor activity, like how you're moving your mouth is more motor than it is logical, whereas speech is more about logic than it is about how you're moving your mouth. You can fuck up the way you move your mouth and people will still understand you. Kind of like how people mispronounce Banderland Kumquat, and you know who I'm talking about, right? Or Kumberbach, I could say, and you would know who I'm talking about. I'm not saying his name, but you know who I'm talking about, right? Because it's more, logical. It's theoretical rather than motor activity. But when you're singing, you're focused on like the motors inside of your throat and your larynx, inside of your lungs, your diaphragm, everything. Right. So I think that the reason he was able to occasionally say those words was out of reflex. He was like angry, and so he would just say it. You get what I'm saying? It reminds me of this guy that was tripping and he forgot how to speak for a bit. Then he swore and was like, I still remember how to swear, though. Oh, good. Swearing saved him from his trip. Yeah, don't do drugs, kids. People with dementia who can still remember songs. Yeah, that actually might be a little bit different, though. With dementia, is a similar concept, but with dementia, um, well, you have to think about things in terms of brain damage, right? Things in terms of injury to the brain. So when we talk about injury to the brain, we're talking about some sort of severance, okay? And when we sever a piece of the brain, typically it loses function, and then we go, oh, so that piece of the brain must provide this function. That's all good and dandy until the next day when you find out that person regained their function, but that part of their brain is still messed up. So it's like you go and you image it and you're like, well, this part of the brain must have repaired itself. Nope, it didn't. That part of the brain is still effed, but for some reason they regained their function back, right? So what's happening is you're working around that damage and making new connections that can do the old thing, but working around the damage, right? With dementia, it's very much similar to that. The problem is that it's really hard to find the workaround. And with listening to music from your own time period, right? People with dementia tend to be able to make that synaptic connection a little bit better. For those who have followed me for a really long time and listened to me talk about learning and memory, then you should probably start to see why this would be the case, because people use memory retrieval cues, right? They say whatever environment you use to study in, you should use a very similar environment to take your test, right? And the more similar you can keep your study environment to your testing environment, the more likely you're going to remember the stuff that you were studying when you take the test. And the reason why is because you've had a lot of retrieval cues, right? You're gaining ability to access these parts that are hidden away in your mind. So with dementia and with music specifically, especially because music is so permeating with our self, right? A lot of people feel very strongly about their music. So when dementia patients listen to music that they felt strongly about, it often kind of reboots the computer and they start talking as though they never had dementia in the first place for a few hours until it goes away. Yeah. Yeah, cursing is more of a reflex, right? Yeah. But it's subconscious. Yes, exactly. Neuroplasticity, yes, that's yes. When you're working around, you're referring to when you get like a lesion and then the person works around that lesion. That is neuroplasticity, and neuroplasticity is happening at all times, right? We're constantly, our brain is malleable. It's constantly reworking so that it can more efficiently learn and retain information. But yes, because of plasticity, oftentimes people can regain function after previously losing it. Know what the extra space in your brain where your left hand connections would be are being used for. So, if anybody's new here and doesn't know Full Metal Harmony, that's my wife. Um, she's wonderful. She also happens to have been born without her left hand. She so we've often wondered, like, in her right hemisphere, over here, somewhere in the parietal lobe, which is like up top here, right in this kind of region, is the necessary cortical representation needed to move her left hand. But because she's never had a left hand, that cortical representation likely is still there, but it's not representing a left hand. So what is it representing? And actually, the answer is probably a lot simpler than most people would assume. If I were to make a guess, and I really do think this would be close to correct. If I were to make a guess about what this cortical representation is representing, because it can't represent your left hand, I would think that it represents the next thing closest to your left hand, which is your left arm. And from what you've told me, you are able to feel your residual arm the way a lot of people kind of feel their fingertip, with that amount of dexterity. And I've even seen you type with your arm on a keyboard better than I can type on my computer with my fingers. So obviously, you do have sensitivity in that part of your arm that is specialized enough that you are able to distinctly touch one key at a time, despite your surface area being something like this. That's pretty big. And so the fact that you're able to do that tells me that you actually have a ton of cortical representation dedicated to understanding specific parts of your residual limb. You bet it's puns. It's probably puns. You know what? Scratch everything I just said. It's puns. It's just puns. You do it without meaning to. What happens in the brain when one experiences dissociation, derealization, and depersonalization? It's hard to say. Generally, it stems from a lot of anxiety. And oftentimes, somebody is going into a state that is much like fight or flight or freeze. And in this case, it's freeze, right? I don't know. I don't know for sure. And the reason I don't know for sure is because it's really hard to have clinical trials for that. Because it would be really unethical for me to get a bunch of people together that I know suffer from derealization and go, okay, I'm going to provoke these symptoms and then test you and see what happens, right? That would be super unethical. No IRB would let you do that. So we can only surmise like what could be happening. What I would think is happening is because you're going into fight or flight, one of the things that happens is less blood goes to your brain because you actually don't need your brain to survive. You need the lizard brain to survive, which is like the innermost, the brain stem, right? So because you don't actually need your brain to survive, you just need your brain stem to survive in the immediate, right? You don't need food, right, to survive in the immediate. Presumably you're in danger, right? Grave danger immediately. So get rid of the bowels, just evacuate the bowels, right? And take all your energy away from any of those parts of the body, the brain or the bowels, and send all that energy into the limbs, right? And the heart and the lungs, and make this thing take in a lot of oxygen and get running really fast. The problem is some people don't run, they freeze. But the blood is still being taken away from those parts of your brain that you don't need. And those parts of your brain that you technically don't need to survive this immediate moment, this immediate danger, starts at the prefrontal cortex, right up here. Oops. I dropped a piece of my brain. Sorry. Gosh, I'm a mess today. Get it together. Anyway, the front of your brain is what will lose the blood flow faster. And that blood flow loss will start to spread back into the more important parts of your brain for immediate survival. This is very similar to what happens when you start drinking, right? When you start drinking, that CO2 buildup and that lack of oxygen starts here, and it works its way back. It's very similar. That's why when you're drinking, you feel real fuzzy. Imagine that, but pumped full of adrenaline and feeling like your impending doom is approaching. That's kind of derealization. You're sort of like drunk with fear. That's what I'm assuming is happening. That's my best guess. Do a video on it. I'll look into it more. I'll see what other people are saying about it. Don't be my test rat. When a person is hypnotized, are they in a different state of consciousness, or is it just a sociocognitive effect of being suggestible? That's a really good question. A person who is hypnotized is actually in a different state of consciousness. And it's not that they're like out of their mind or something. Like they're there. They're awake, presumably. They might not be awake. They might fall asleep. I don't know. But, okay. Here's what I'll tell you that I know. Is that when you are sleeping and you're dreaming, you can look at the brain the brain of a dreaming person and look at the wave form in which that neural activity is oscillating. So different parts of the brain oscillate at different frequencies and at different times of the day and at different oscillations during different levels of excitability. You might be asleep. It'll be at a different level. You might be wide awake. It'll be at a different level, different oscillation. So these different oscillations are what we call frequencies, right? We know in observing people who are dreaming, their prefrontal cortex is oscillating at what we call theta wavelength, okay, which is very different from when you're awake. We also know that people who are meditating, as they meditate, they slowly align their whole brain to start oscillating into theta. Okay. And then we also know that people who are being hypnotized move their brain to oscillate like theta. So you're being put into a dreamlike state. If you're meditating, you're literally just hypnotizing yourself. You can allow someone else to hypnotize you for you, but they can't make you do anything you don't want to do. That's true. And anytime you see a show where they do that to people, most often the people they're doing it to are in on the experience. Sorry to ruin that for you, but oh, you want to be my test rat? You can be my beanie brainy, my little beanie brainies, my neural nerds. I've been missing this chat over here. Let me see if I can catch up real quick. Okay. Delayed speech in children? I'm not sure. It would depend on what's delaying the speech. Sometimes children have delayed speech because they have bilingual parents, right? It takes them a while to pick up on both languages. After they've caught up, though, they typically learn language faster than other kids. It's just that initial phase when they're young that takes them a longer time. There could be other deficits. They might have, be on the spectrum, right? There might be other reasons. Sometimes children are just different. They don't want to speak. Sometimes it's uncomfortable for them. They don't feel confident in their ability to speak. Think of it as you learning a new language. If you've ever gone to learn a new language and you're how to say hi, my name is, right? That's literally your only thing you can say. So somebody's like, okay, time to practice your Spanish or whatever. And you're they're like, just introduce yourself. And how to say, me llamo so-and-so, but you can't because it feels physically uncomfortable because you're like, I sound like a little kid. I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, right? Sometimes I think kids can be worried about their own efficacy to produce speech, right? There are other things too. Mainly developmental things come to mind, just problems with brain development. But for the most part, I don't know. Because there's so many things that can cause that, Sometimes it's just a really scary experience, Yes, Harmony and I got married on the beach. It was wonderful. Yeah, usually some kind of trauma, physical or otherwise. Yeah, go snoop around. Sorry, I'm just checking out my TikTok chat real quick. Thoughts on mediums? They're smaller than larges. I'm just kidding. I think that actually I do have a thought on mediums. I think that mediums are assholes. I really do. I hope I don't. But I feel like I think that mediums take advantage of people that are hurting. I think that mediums are people who take advantage of people that are hurting and then take their money for it. And oftentimes get social gain for it. And they're almost always caught. being scam artists. That's what I think of mediums. EMDR is like real hypnosis. That makes sense. Okay, where am I at? You're going to donate your brain to me? Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I will take it. We can find out a way to make that happen, assuming you die first. But that might not happen. I don't know. Different state of consciousness also applies to when people are possessed or being exorcised. You feel like mediums genuinely believe they have powers? I think that some people, I think most mediums know they're full of shit. Most mediums know they're full of shit. I think that some people are really good at predicting things. And this makes sense because we're all good at predicting things. In fact, that is an evolutionary mechanism. Like I've been saying this whole live, we are statisticians, right? So we are constantly taking data. We're constantly taking in information so that we can try to make a prediction about what's going to happen next. This is what helps us to feel safe. When we fall asleep, we dream. And oftentimes we dream about what is going to happen in the future. And every once in a while, we get that dream strikingly correct. Very surprising, right? I think that some people have really good predicting mechanisms subconsciously, and they can sort of capitalize them. And I think some people have normal predicting mechanisms, but overestimate their own capability. And I think that these people often consider themselves psychic or mediums. But I just don't believe in them. I don't believe in them because if they were real, it would have been a proven thing by now. And it's not at all a proven thing. It's not even close. In fact, it's very much disproven. A lot of evidence is disproven mediums. There isn't any evidence that has proven a medium to be correct. If you find some, bring it to me. I'll help you see why it's incorrect. Right, cold reading right, and anybody can do that, right? Well, not anybody can do that. You have to practice it. You have to get good at it. But like we do that all the time. We just don't realize we're doing it because we do it subconsciously. We do it quietly to ourselves. We just ask questions. Hey, what's your favorite color? Hey, where'd you go today? Hey, did you check out this new bar? You know, like we're constantly picking up data, and then our subconscious is making decisions about that person based on the data that we're collecting, right? Yeah. It's as simple as that. But sometimes, you know, that's why they say trust your gut. Well, okay, but your gut is very strongly tied to your subconscious, and your subconscious knows things that you do not know that you know. And I think some people get a little carried away with that, which is okay. It's not okay if you're taking advantage of people that are hurting. That's when it's not okay. But I wouldn't say it's like a superpower. That's something everybody can do, and you can get better at if you train yourself. Mirror neurons? Yeah, what about them? Mirror neurons are located in the hippocampus. What would you like to know? Mirror neurons are really cool. They're a lot like, they're very related to place cell neurons. Mirror neurons are, for anybody who doesn't know, if I'm like looking at you performing an activity, as I imagine myself performing the activity that you're performing, my mirror neurons are igniting in such a way as to convey this. So we know that monkeys have mirror neurons and that they actually do respond in such a way. We know that children also respond similar to monkeys. And this is a very powerful learning mechanism. What this allows us to do is to learn a task or activity having never actually performed that task or activity. Prior to this, we could never do anything novel. You would have to, and this goes back to the consciousness thing. Some people can't do this, by the way. Some people, supposedly, if this is one of the levels of consciousness, there's a level of consciousness that is related to mirror neurons and your ability to mirror other people's activities. And some people can't. They can watch you do the activity, and then you go, okay, now you try. And they're like, I have no idea how you did that. Even if you break it down for them and go real slow. Are mirror neurons why some people tend to mouth along when someone else talks? Yes. Yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Or sometimes if you're really hungry and somebody like pulls out like a Snickers out of their purse or something and they start like nibbling on it, you'll kind of like feel yourself moving your tongue, or you might even like move your teeth a little bit. Yeah. And actually, if you do this in front of a monkey, that monkey will do that to you. They'll start mouthing like they're eating. Dogs and cats do it too. Yeah. Babies do it for sure. And I mean, that's all babies do, right? Is mirror your activities so that they can learn how to do it for themselves. Yeah. Humans we're very special. Babies are amazing, by the way. If you ever get into a field of psychology, you're not sure where to start with babies. Babies are crazy. What is up? Yeah, I'm here. I'm live on YouTube. I'm glad you're here. Welcome. Favorite demonstration of mirror neurons is when you're watching a movie with a person underwater. You feel like you can't breathe. I don't know that that's the same as mirror neurons are more motor related, but I'm sure there are other processes going on there. Every time someone clears their throat excessively. Yeah. Not even the Long Island medium. No, they're all full of crap. Sorry. Entertaining, though, until they take advantage of people. Then it's less entertaining, which is usually the case. Yeah, mediums are full of shit. And they're awful. Yeah. They just take people's money. And it's the worst part is it's not even that they're just taking people's money. Everybody takes people's money, right? People are jerks. But it takes a special kind of jerk to see somebody who's suffering really badly and taking that money from that person. These are like scam artists, right? Just scam artists. Like the people who call you and they're like, hey, your social security's been suspended. By the way, I'm a government agent. My badge number is blah, blah, blah. You're like, holy crap, that sounds really bad, man. What does that mean? I can't use my social security number? Oh, shit, am I even a citizen still? They're like, no, you're not. And you won't be unless you get some Apple iTunes or some shit, And it's like, of course it doesn't make sense, but take that to the extreme. You can be like, oh, man, thanks for helping me out, because I'm dealing with the death of my mom, and I gotta go figure out a barrier. I don't have enough money for that. Da, da, da. Thank you for helping me out with this really hard thing. And no matter what you say to them, they're just like, yeah, just give me the money. Yeah, just give me the money. I don't give a shit. I don't care that you're suffering. Fuck you. Give me the money. Right? I can't get behind that. I can't. And that's what mediums are. That is what mediums are. No thanks. If you're a medium, I hate you. Go away. You're a bad person. That's just all that is. Yawning is definitely an example, for sure, of mirror neurons. Yeah, yawning is exactly what's happening there. Same with, and here's a really common one, especially for little kids. Watching kung fu movies. You watch Jackie Chan or something, right? Everybody remembers watching kung fu movies when they're little, right? And they're like bouncing around their living room, like doing kicks and punches, and they're, that's your mirror neurons firing off to tell you how to do kung fu. We're all kung fu masters in our own way. Yeah. Anywho, let's see, where are we at? Okay, so we were talking about Carl Wernicke and Paul Broca, other areas in the left temporal lobe. So the beginning of modern neuroscience, as we've come to understand it. Oh, what about people who can connect with spirits? Yeah, again, I don't think they're real. I don't know that spirits are real. They might be. They might be. I don't know. I have no way of scientifically testing this, so it's almost not worth me asking. But I don't. I don't believe in it. I don't believe people. That's tough. That's a tough one to answer. Spiritual beliefs are unique to every individual, and they're very important to people's being. That's what I'm learning. And maybe there are people who can talk to spirits. If you think about it, when someone prays, that's what they're doing. Sometimes I talk to my aunt who passed away. Sometimes I talk to my nephew. Sometimes I talk to other people. Sometimes I talk to people who are still alive. I just say it. And I go, I hope this gets to you somehow. You know what I mean? But I really do think that's the extent of where that goes. I don't think that if there is anything out there that it can communicate back with language. Maybe it can. I don't know. But people have spiritual experiences all the time. And I'm not going to sit here and invalidate anybody's spiritual experience. I just specifically don't believe in mediums. I don't believe in the practice of taking people's money to claim you talk to the dead. I believe that's bullshit. But if you are someone who prays, or you are someone who performs in sweat lodges, who wants to speak to their ancestors or the great spirits or the almighty universe or whatever thing you believe in, I think that's a holy thing, and I think that's a respectful thing. That's okay. Who knows? Maybe in some essence, you're just talking to yourself. Some people consider it communication with an untapped, previously unsuspected inner resource, right? Some people are talking within. Scientifically, that is where I will land. Is that I think some people might think they're talking to spirits, but they're actually talking to their own inner representation of what they think that spirit is like. Similar to how when you dream, let's say I'm dreaming and Harmony comes up to me in my dream and she kicks me in my shin, right? I wake up and I go, oh man, that felt almost real. Hey, Harm, you'll never guess what I dreamt. I dreamt you kicked me in the shin. Am I going to be mad at Harmony for kicking me in the shin? Maybe if I'm irrational, but like in reality, she never kicked me in the shin. In fact, the person who kicked me in the shin was me. I dressed up as Harmony and then came and kicked myself in the shin because for some reason I felt like experiencing that. I don't know. There she is, the infamous. Dope, fresh. Double hand wave.
Wow.
Well, without the second hand. Second hand dope is what I call my wife.
No. You'll do it once.
I did it once. I can't do it again. But you got to witness it. Dreams are super weird. I totally forgot what I was talking about. Yeah, so I guess okay. So I guess in the way that we relate dream people to ourselves is similar to how I think people perceive spirits that they're communicating with. I think it's really just an inner. It's sort of like the super ego, right? There's a lot of things that Freud fucked up. But one thing that I really like that kind of holds up is his idea of the id, the ego, and the superego. The id and the ego are a little iffy, but the superego is pretty solid, which is your caretaker's internal. It's your internal representation of your caretakers on you, upon you, right? It's this little voice inside of your head that goes, what would mom say? Right? What would uncle say? And I think that when someone dies, if they were really connected to us, if we were there with them all the time, we have a really solid part of them. I almost said in my heart, but I mean in my brain, right? Again, reminiscent of this old world thinking where we thought emotions came from the heart. They don't, they come from the brain. But my brain has a representation of this person. And so in spirit, I can sort of, in spirit, I'm using that term loosely, I can sort of communicate with this representation. I don't know if it's actually them. Maybe it is. That depends. What makes something real? Is it the fact that you perceived it? The Buddhists think so. And then we get into a whole other argument, right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting. Theory of mind? Yeah, yes. That is exactly what theory of mind is. Theory of mind is your ability to kind of try to guess what another person would be thinking or doing in that situation. That is what theory of mind is. Yeah. Correct. Sorry, I'm missing the chat over here. Sometimes wonder if the spirits can travel in dreams. I'm not really like, I don't know. So what you're saying is that spirits are connected and stay connected outside of the physical. I don't know. I don't even know if spirits exist. Scientifically, they don't. There's really no evidence for a spirit. There really isn't. People have tried to say there's evidence. The enough evidence has been shown that there's a spirit. Sorry, let me collect my thoughts. The only evidence that I've ever seen show that there might be a spirit was this really weird, kind of dumb experiment where somebody measured somebody's body weight as they were dying without taking into account like gases being released and things like that, which happens when you die. And there really is no evidence for a spirit realm. There is no scientific evidence for a spirit realm. Not that I'm aware. If you find any, please bring it to me. I'll talk about it. I will. I have a whole thing that's dedicated to that too soon. And I am going to be talking about some of this stuff. But as of right now, from a neuroscience perspective, I don't believe spirits are a real thing. That's where I'm at with that. If I take science out of it, because science can't explain everything, that's just a fact. Shit, science hardly explains anything, really, if you think about it. But it's possible that they exist. I don't think that we have contact with them, or that our contact is very limited, I should say. They measured like a 17-gram difference. Okay, so it wasn't exactly 17 grams for every person, right? That would be unscientific. The whole thing's unscientific. But the thing is like that there are other things being released from the body that are not necessarily visible, especially gases. Believe it or not, gas weighs something. Various gases weigh various weights, right? And those are being released from the body as the body dies. Even oxygen weighs something, you know. That's just the first thing that I would go to. I don't know why you would say, oh, this body got lighter. That must be the spirit leaving. I don't even know why you would do that in the first place. The fact that they even did that in the first place was very unscientific, right? They had no basis for even doing the experiment in the first place, and that is very unscientific. Normally, when you perform a scientific experiment, you're basing your work off of the previous work of many other individuals who have led you all down to this one point. What they were doing was just going, I'm going to try some bullshit and then just say something about it. And then it got wildly popularized by the media, as things often do, because it just sounded interesting. It doesn't make it good or true. Just it was interesting. Yeah, it was a really silly experiment. I have no idea when it was. I didn't realize it was that old, honestly. Sounds about right. That's, 1910 is where we started to pick up. Actually, I was just about to talk about that. That's when we started to pick up in science and do a lot better, because before that, people were actually kind of shitty at science. And honestly, they stayed kind of shitty at science for a while. It wasn't until this last like couple decades that we've gotten real harsh about it too. And we have found some issues for sure. Yeah, you called BS for sure. Well, it doesn't take very much to quickly start to break that argument down, right? Yeah. So where I left off, we were talking about, the beginnings of modern approach to behavioral neuroscience come from William James. If you don't know who William James is, he is super famous in the world of psychology. He's basically like the father of psychology, which started around that time, right? 1910. Actually, William James wrote his book on psychology. What is it? Yeah, Principles of Psychology is literally the title of the book. He wrote that in 1890, right? So 20 years before this. And he promoted very much the idea that thought came about as process of the brain, inner workings of the brain. And he believed that the human experience, just having the human experience, came about as electrical properties of the brain. And this became wildly popular in the early 1900s and took off and just fueled the fire for so much more research, right? And the first important scientist I'll tell you about regarding that fire being fueled was a scientist who lived about the same time as William James. His name is Ivan Pavlov. I think you're all probably familiar, but let's just play pretend like you're not. You think eventually science will explain spirit. All right, I'm going to take an aside on that because I want to talk to you about that. I think that for a very long time, people did not understand how physical maladies work. It was not until people studied physical maladies that they started to understand physical maladies. For instance, if you break your leg, you should probably not rub dirt in it. In fact, you should probably use soap and wash it, right? We figured that out after we decided that physical medicine was a thing. Before physical medicine, your leg is broken and you're probably going to die from it because God hates you. Or God loves you and you'll survive. Okay? It wasn't until we got away from that ideal that we started to really study the body physiologically and how to repair it. After that came people who were crazy. People who just didn't make sense. They couldn't talk. They'd get hit in the head, and all of a sudden, they were wackadoo. Okay? There's so many wrong things with this person. You know what? They're possessed. Their humors are way off. Who knows what the fuck's wrong with this guy? It wasn't until William James and his contemporaries and the people who came after him who started to say, actually, I think that these are problems with the brain. Much like you can have a physical malady, I think you can also have a mental malady. And sometimes it manifests in the brain. Sometimes you can see the brain actively being damaged. Other times you can't. Sometimes you can't see any difference, which is the case with acid overdose, right? Sometimes people take LSD to an extent that it fries their brain permanently. They are gone. They are in a drug-induced psychosis that they will never get out of. If you scan their brain, though, it looks the same as any other brain. It's really hard to tell that this is happening to them. But trust me, they're gone. It wasn't until we started to study the physiology of the brain that we started to take mental health seriously, and it became a science, right? Similarly, I think that the spirit is part of your mental health, but I think the spirit is also tied to your physical health. I used to think that the spirit was a separate thing and that it is possible that with study, eventually the spirit will be an accepted medical thing. But now I'm starting to think about it differently. I think the mind is the thought process, and it can be ailed. I think that the body is a physical process, and it can be ailed. I think that spirit is the connection between the two and how they speak to one another. I think when someone is down in spirit, I think they have a disconnect between how their mind talks to their body. I think when someone is a narcissist, I think they have a disconnect with how their mind is talking to their body. Right? Yeah. And I think that when we start to move that route, I'm not going to be the one to do it, but I hope somebody will. I think we'll start to understand spiritual process better. I think that I think it has a lot to do with earlier. Someone had asked. I think it might have been Monshuri, but it might be somebody else. Had asked about a shared consciousness between individuals. That is what I believe the spirit to be. I think that you and I all have a shared spirit right now. You're sitting with me and you're taking this information in. You're asking questions. You're providing helpful feedback. You're providing resources to me. And I think that this communication we have going back and forth, I know there's a lot of you and there's only one of me, but me and you, each one of you as individuals, me and you as an individual have a spiritual connection. It might be a small one. It might be big over time. With some of you, I've known you a while. Some of you I've known over a year. And we might have a really big connection. Some of you I just met today. And we'll have a little bit lesser of a connection. But that's okay. Maybe it'll get bigger later. That being the case, I think there's a spirit between us, between our bodies and our minds. You see what I'm saying? I think spirit, rather than being a separate aspect, might be a quality of something. I suspect. I'm not sure. This is just me talking out of my butt now. Yeah. Anyway, sorry I went on that long tangent. Doesn't seem like anybody's commenting now. So maybe I just irritated a bunch of people. I don't know. Anywho, let's talk about Ivan Pavlov, huh? I'll get back to science. Yeah, spirit's science. They're spiritual sciences, right? I don't know if I agree with them. Kind of depends. And that's another thing. It's really hard for me to talk scientifically and not act to discredit the thoughts and feelings of other people. But I do have to constantly remind myself that science only teaches us very little. And if science has taught me anything, it is that nothing is proven for sure. The only thing that is for sure is that nothing is ever for sure. That is the only constant. We have really good ways of predicting things based on really great theories that have stood up to the test of time. But it can all change tomorrow in light of new information. Everything we know can flip upside down in light of new information. That will always be true. That is always true in the field of science. And the better I can do to remember that, the better of a scientist I will be. Only thing for sure is death and taxes. That is absolutely correct. Curious, I just jumped in. I'm just talking about scientific stuff, mostly neuroscience. We did get into a weird tangent about the spirit. So welcome. I'm glad you're here. I am on YouTube if you want to follow the chat there. You love it. Okay, good. How come music makes us feel so good? You know, okay, remember earlier I was talking about okay, we're not going to talk about Pavlov. We're going to talk about music. Earlier I was talking about oscillations, right? You had that question about, great questions, by the way. I love your questions. You have some good ones. Everybody has great questions, but you talked about hey, what's happening when someone's being hypnotized, right? We talked about, well, your brain's going off in different oscillations of activity. Different parts of your brain are going off. When you're dreaming, everything sort of syncs up to theta, right? We were talking about that. A very similar process happens when you watch TV and you're entertained. Another similar process happens when you listen to music and are entertained. Uh, you sort of go into this dreamlike state. The difference is that music works with frequencies, and those frequencies are directly tied to the cochlea in your ears, and the cochlea of your ears are very close to the brain, which is important because they're necessary for not the cochlea, but the semicircular canals, which are attached to the cochlea, are necessary for balance, right? And coordination. So you have your balance and your coordination tied to your ability to process musical input. And all of that is right next to your base of your spinal cord, right? Where it meets the cerebellum and where it meets the rest of the brain. So when you're oscillating these waves inside of your cochlea, you're also oscillating the waves inside of your brainstem. This is a very strange physiological experience. Not for everybody. For a lot of people, it's just okay. But for some people, they have actually a spiritual experience with music when they listen to it because they feel it running up their spine. There is you know what? I need to add this guy to this video. I told you all I'm making a video about what I'm talking about today, which is kind of a history of neuroscience. How did we get to understand the brain today? One of the most amazing people in the field of neuroscience, I totally didn't even mention, and I should. And I'm going to go back and put him in. His name is Oliver Sacks. His name was Oliver Sacks. He died a few years back, I think maybe 2016, 2015. Anyway, he was a pioneer in the field of neuroscience before neuroscience became a thing. And so he was a psychiatrist who everybody would call when they did not know who else to call. He ended up treating patients with the wildest disorders that you could think of. For instance, one person got hit in their parietal lobe. Your parietal lobe is just right behind the frontal cortex, right? And this is responsible for your understanding of where your body is at, what part of your body you're referencing, and where it is at in three-dimensional space. This is what we call proprioception, one of your senses. Everybody says you have 5 senses. You have a million senses. One of them, you don't have a million. You have like 9 or 10 of them. But one of them is proprioception, which is your ability to see without your eyes where your body is at in three-dimensional space. With my hands out to my sides and with my eyes closed, I can touch my nose, right? I can touch my nose, then touch my fingers. Touch my nose, then touch my fingers. Touch my nose, touch my fingers. Touch my eyebrow, touch my nose, touch my fingers, right? And I'm able to do this because my body can see itself, right? My body sees where itself is at. That's proprioception. A woman who he saw got damaged in that part of the head, and she was unable to propriocept appropriately. And what ended up happening is anytime she was not actively looking at her arm and physically like restraining it, it would just go off and do its own thing. It would touch people, grope people, throw things off the desk next to it. As she's walking by, it would just touch the wall and run up and down because her brain was not getting appropriate feedback with what to do with itself. So the brain was just telling the arm to do random things because it wasn't receiving appropriate feedback about where the arm was at in three-dimensional space. I don't know where the arm is at. I'll assume it should go over here, right? She had to physically look at her hand and say, no hand, go over here. Do this thing. Even worse was another gal who had that happen to her legs. And so she had to stare at her legs as she walked and stood up. The moment she stopped looking at her legs would go walk different directions without her, even if she was trying to stand still. Lots of weird things can happen. Anyway, if you want to read about stuff like that and more, there are really good books written by Oliver Sacks. He's amazing. I own a lot of his books. I don't own all of them. I hope to someday. Here are some good ones. One relating to Angelo's comment here which is How Come Music Makes Us Feel So Good. He wrote a book called Musicophile. Or it might be Musicophilia. I can't remember. I think it's Musicophile. Oliver Sacks. I would recommend you go buy that book. It's a very good book. I'm pretty sure it's like cheap enough on Amazon. You could pick it up or maybe get it for Kindle or whatever you got to do. I recommend that book. I recommend anything by Oliver Sacks. And if you're interested in the weird kind of crazy stuff that can happen, like I was just talking about with the proprioception problems, read his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. It's a really good book, very famous, often brought up in college lectures. Yeah. Correct. Oliver Sacks, S-A-K-S. No, that's not right. That's not how you spell Sacks. That's you're thinking of Ellen Sacks. That's how Ellen Sacks spells her last name. I think it's S-A-C-K-S or S-A-C-H-S. C-K-S. I'll put that in the chat over here. If you want to put it in the chat in TikTok. Literally read everything by this person. He was one of the most amazing people to ever live. And I really want to be like him someday. I hope that someday I'm writing crazy books like he did. You know, and conveying really awesome things about neuroscience. That's where I want to be. Hopefully, one day. Entertaining the masses with interesting stuff. How long is this? We've been going for 2.5 hours. Oh, man. Huh? Did you say something? Okay. Let's see. Well on my way. I am not currently hungry at the moment, but if you are hungry, we can get food. Let me finish what I was talking about before, and then I think it'll be time to end the live by then. So, and if you have questions in the meantime, please. Thanks, Kate. Right, so we were talking about Ivan Pavlov, right? Everybody knows who he is. He's the one, Pavlov's dogs, right? He discovered classical conditioning. So, real brief overview, as though there's anybody here who doesn't know. Maybe there isn't. Yeah, maybe there is. You know, maybe there's somebody who doesn't know. Ivan Pavlov was a Russian psychologist, or rather physiologist is what he was really at the time. Although back then everybody was a little bit of everything. He was studying the salivary glands in dogs, right? So he's very much just trying to study anatomy. And he's watching them salivate in response to food. And so when it's time to feed them, he rings a bell so that they'll come to get the food. And he noticed one day that they were salivating the moment they heard the bell, even if they did not receive food. And he realized that, oh, I can condition them to salivate to the bell instead of to the food, right? So in this case, we are conditioning a physical response to happen due to a stimulus that shouldn't happen. This is literally learning, right? This is the process of learning something new. Oh, I'm well fed. Thank you. Well fed. Yes. And this flood of progress also brought about Carl Lashley's idea. He created this program, right? He said, well, if we figured out the mechanism by which beings learn, then we must figure out the mechanism by which beings remember. And so he was in search of the engram. This was a project he started. He wanted people to find where a memory lived at in the brain. If someone has a memory, it must be stored. And if it's stored, where is it stored? And how is it stored? Right? This was Carl Lashley. Unfortunately, he died before he was able to see that happen. But he left us with this really important notion that did end up holding true today, which is that a memory, which at the time they thought, oh, one memory is stored in one little part of the brain, a different memory is stored in a different little part of the brain. And he said, no, aspects of a memory are stored in different parts of the brain. And when you're recalling that memory, you're taking little aspects from all over the brain and uniting that activity. You're making a connection between them all. That is what he thought memory to be. And largely, that is what we believe memory to be today. And based off of that theory, we are even able to take fMRI images of their brain, and then we can ask them to remember something, and we can print what they are seeing, in a sense, with very poor resolution, but we are able to do it, such as a house or a face. And in fact, Kate Jude actually sent our group chat a couple days ago, this video of a colleague of mine, Bryce Kuehl, and his grad student, who was a friend of mine at the University of Oregon, who are working on doing the exact research I was just talking about, which is pretty cool. Did a video or series on Black scientists related. Okay, sure, I can do that. I would start with Carl Hart. Kevin Hart. Carl Hart. Kevin Hart's a different kind of science. He's a social science. Carl Hart, Dr. Carl Hart, is he did work on the crack cocaine epidemic and showed that people really only would get addicted to crack cocaine if you leave them in impoverished conditions of living. If they had enriched conditions of living, then they were way less likely to become addicted. That's probably where I'd start. He should be our first featured scientist. I should see if I can get his email and reach out to him and see if he'd let me put him on the website that we're making. Anyway, he's one of my favorites. I learned about him when I was first in undergrad. I was like it was maybe the end of my first year or the beginning of my second year of college that I learned about him. And he actually inspired me to do a lot of things. He actually kind of inspired me to get into the field of neuroscience in the first place. He's one of the people that did. Yeah. Carl Hart. Carl with K. I believe it's Carl and then Hart. Let me look him up real quick. Oh, it's Carl with a C. Yeah, it's I'll just put him in the chat here. Dr. Carl Hart. In case anybody wants to go look him up. He's really cool. I think he cut his hair now, but he used to have really, really super long hair. Anyway. Yes. Yeah. So Carl Lashley had a student that is very famous, and this is kind of where we're about to end our journey. Carl Lashley's student is Donald Hebb, or was Donald Hebb. Donald Hebb is who we get Hebbian learning from. Donald Hebb proposed our first conception of the idea of long-term potentiation, which is how we store things into long-term memory. Specifically, how neural synapses are connected, how they're formed, and how they're strengthened, right? So how aspects of a memory are tied together. So he was very important. He's where we get the colloquial saying, neurons that fire together wire together. That's because of Hebbian learning. Yeah. And with that, there are many neuroscientists doing things today. I'm one of them. And we are progressing day by day, little by little, every single day, over and over, steady trudge as usual. And hopefully we'll keep making progress. But now we have tools to reaffirm a lot of things. There's two other people I want to talk about too. The whole point of this all, by the way, is so that we can better diagnose and better treat diagnoses, right? But I do want to give a quick shout out to two other guys named Camilo Golgi and Santiago Ramon y Cajal. And they were not necessarily like behavioral neuroscientists, but they were definitely neuroscientists. They were physiologists, and they studied neural anatomy. So Camilo Golgi is the person for whom Golgi bodies are named after inside of biological cells, right? Animal cells, they have the nucleus, and then the nucleus feeds out RNA to the Golgi bodies. The Golgi bodies then modify that RNA so that it can become some sort of protein, and then sends that protein off, right? So Golgi bodies are actually named after Camilo Golgi. The reason why is because he studied the technique, the staining technique, that was necessary to be able to observe internal cellular structures, including smooth and rough endoplasmic reticulum. And so the Golgi staining technique was phenomenal at that time. Keep in mind, he was one of those people from around 1910, right? I think he died maybe like a couple decades after, or maybe a decade after. But so Camilo Golgi came up with this theory. It was called the reticular theory. He thought that the brain was one big spongy mass and that it was all interconnected and just talking with itself. And Santiago Ramon y Cajal, who is like one of my personal heroes, I love this guy. He went on to perfect Golgi's staining method. And they're both known for their immaculate drawings, by the way. You should look up their drawings. They're really cool. They would observe these neurons under a microscope, and you can't really keep the specimen preserved on slides for very long. Like now we can do a lot better. But back then you couldn't really keep them preserved for very long. They would deteriorate. So they had to draw everything that they were seeing so that they could put it somewhere in a book. And so there's all these drawings from Ramon y Cajal and from Golgi that are just beautiful. You should check them out. Anyway, Santiago Ramon y Cajal argued against the reticular theory. He said, he proposed the neuron doctrine, which was that the brain is not one big meshy material that's interconnected and talks with itself. He said, no, the brain is made up of single cells called neurons, and that these neurons are interconnected and they talk with one another, but they in and of themselves are their own beings, and they are their own self regardless of any other structure around them. And this pissed Golgi off. Golgi was like, you're not gonna clown on me, like, fuck you, right? Is what Golgi said, basically. And another thing Santiago Ramon y Cajal had said was he proposed the law of dynamic polarization. What this means is that not only is the brain made up of single cells called neurons, but these single cells actually have a flow of communication that moves in one direction. We now know that this isn't entirely true, but for the most part, in most neurons, it is pretty true that, in general, the electrochemical signal moves one direction, down the axon. It's from the dendrites to the cell body, down the axon, out the synaptic boutons. And different cell structures are structured differently. Different neurons, different types of neurons are structured a little bit differently. They work a little bit differently. But for the most part, information goes from the body to the axon, down the axon to the boutons where it's released. So, largely, Santiago Ramon y Cajal happened to be correct, regardless of the fact that he had no way of really testing this. And then, here we are 100 years later with the technology to do so. And we found out, sure enough, he's right. There is such a thing as a synaptic cleft. Sure enough, these single cells are not connected. They're just really close proximity to each other. And that, sure enough, this electrochemical signal does seem to move a specific direction. So Santiago Ramon y Cajal was very important. Regardless, Camilo Golgi's like, hey, fuck you, guy. And they battled it out for the 1906 Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine. And you know what happened? They had to share it. They had to share it because Camilo Golgi was due his respect for all the work that he had done in anatomy and physiology. But if you go back and read their lectures that they gave, Camilo Golgi says this is why reticular theory is right. And Santiago Ramon y Cajal proceeds to just nerd stomp him into the ground. This is why you're wrong. This is why I'm right. And he provides such compelling evidence that it was almost it was undeniable that the prize was his, but they ended up sharing it anyway. These two are not behavioral neuroscientists like I am, but they're extremely important to my work and everybody's work that works on the brain. Hey, what's up, King Chris? Sorry I was going off on this really long thing. I have been sleeping okay. Better than usual. It's not great, but better than usual. Perception and observation are the best way to rationalize anything. I would argue that that might be true. It might be, but it depends. I would argue that it's all in the data. Depends on who's doing the perceiving and who's doing the observation, right? If you if you have vision problems, right, like I do when I take my contacts out, I wouldn't necessarily trust you with your observations or your ability to perceive. You know what I mean? I'll trust a computer's ability to perceive. Actually, I'm all for automation in science. I'm trying to do that for my lab right now. I'm trying to figure out how to learn to use deep lab cuts so that I can get computers to analyze my data for me better than I could do it, because I don't trust my own ability to perceive and observe. I would rather computers that are far better at this task to do it for me. Computers will never compare to the human technology, but there are certain things we can train them to do far better than we ourselves can do. An amendment. Keen insight and an open mind. Yeah, I would agree with that. I commonly keep this colloquialism with me that is sort of like, let me see if I can remember it. It's been a while. I keep it internalized, but it's been a while since I've said it to another human being. If you want to be a really good observer of life, of research, or of anything, if you want to be a good observationalist, then you should know who you're talking about. Who you're talking about is you, but you ask the question, who? And who is WHO, which is an acronym for willing, honest, and open. You must be willing to listen to anything, honest with what you find, and open-minded, right? As long as you are willing to do the search, honest with what you find, and open-minded about what your findings might mean, then you know who you are, right? I hope that helps somebody. It's kind of cute. Cute little way of thinking about things. Thanks for the likes. I appreciate you. Hang on one sec. Harm, if you're listening, do whatever you want. It's not going to bother me at all. I actually am done talking about this. I might even end the live because we've been going strong for a solid 2 hours and 40 minutes. So it might be time to end it, unless anybody has any dying, burning desires, any questions they need to ask. Thank you, future Dr. King. Thanks. Yeah, maybe. Hopefully. It depends on what I decide to do. But chances are it'll eventually be Dr. King, yeah. Thanks, Angelo. I'm really glad you were here. I really love your questions. I hope to see you again next time. I am planning on making Friday Night Lives a regular thing on YouTube. I don't know that I'll always be live here on TikTok, but probably for the next few weeks I will be. But definitely on YouTube, Friday Night Live is a thing. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining me. We could both someday be Dr. King. That would be dope. There's a lot to talk about, yeah. Share what I've learned this week when I become even more famous, as though I'm famous now. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate you. You are just so kind. I won't forget about you. Or maybe I will. Maybe I'll be like, Chris who? Maybe someday. Share what I've learned this week. Yeah. Wait, hang on. I've learned a lot of things this week. But one thing I learned that was kind of cool. Let me see if I can bring it up somewhere here. Oh, I might have closed down a bit. Shoot. Give me 1 second. Hang on. Sorry. It's taking me a second. Here we go. Is this it? No, that's not what I want. Dang it. Get on there. Oh, here it is. Yeah, here. Okay. So, something that we were talking about earlier was long-term potentiation, right? Still got this live stream going. Something we were talking about earlier was long-term potentiation. And basically what that looks like, right? This is Hebbian learning. This is actually where we left off with Donald Hebb. So, what we've come to understand is that you can actually equate the building of new neural synapses to developing more dendritic spines, right? And the way that those dendritic spines are communicating at synapses. And when you are learning something long term, you're encoding more of those dendritic spines to happen in the areas of the brain required for memory. And we've seen this demonstrated in the hippocampus, right, which is required for forming new memory. We in my lab study pain, and we suspect this same process happens in the spinal cord. So we're trying to show that. What was just published and shown recently, and I found out about it today, was that this same thing happens in the motor cortex, which is in your parietal lobe, the same cortex that we were talking about earlier, right up here, right behind the frontal cortex. That's where all your body stuff is. So athletes, or people relearning how to move if they've suffered a head injury or something like that. It was just verified that that happens there, and that it was due to a specific protein. Can't remember what it was. It was PRB. Yeah. Paired immunoglobulin receptor B in pyramidal neuron dendrites, which is interesting that it's pyramidal neurons in the motor cortex because the hippocampus, the part of the hippocampus that does that, is also pyramidal neurons in the C3. I think they're located. C3 part of the hippocampus. I am talking about neural pathways. Sorry if that's a little bit over anybody's head. I'm not trying to talk in such a way that you can't understand me, but I thought I would share that. Yeah, super cool. So it looks like we're starting to see a pattern, right? Turns out humans are good at that. What's the question for? Oh, is that part of the occipital lobe? No. No, it's not. The occipital lobe is directly behind that. So you have up here, you have the frontal cortex, right? If the the person is facing this way, you have the Gosh, this like thing is like bugging out. You have the frontal cortex, right? You have the parietal lobe, which is like roughly here. Does that make sense? And then you have the temporal lobe, which is kind of demarcated by this really deep groove, this sulcus here. And then you have the occipital lobe, which is actually like right back here. It's this little piece back here. Yeah. But the occipital lobe does feed into both the parietal lobe and the temporal lobe to answer information about visual processing. Have you heard of Dr. Ginger Campbell? No, I have not. Who is that? Who are they? About the effects of strokes on the brain. I took note. The neural mapping of the brain. Yeah. The way we map the brain is not totally accurate either. That should be noted. We often say this is this area of the brain and this is what it's associated with, but it's super malleable. You know, if you are talking about somebody who is born without the ability to see, if you're talking about somebody who's born without the ability to see, their occipital lobe will never be used for visual information. That doesn't mean it doesn't get used. Instead, it gets used by the parietal lobe for information about the body, balance, somatosensation, these kind of things. And some of it will come from the temporal lobe, which will make that person really good at auditory processing and comprehension. Yeah. So when you're thinking, oh, blind people are really good at listening in on things. Yeah, well, that's why, right? It's because they've dedicated that cortical space to something else. Has a podcast of neuroscience, documented that processes of her learning or the book she reads in the podcast. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I actually am starting another podcast. The old one kind of died. I tried to get it going again, and it was too dry. I think I'm going to do something else associated with this new YouTube channel that I'm doing. I'll let you know when it's here. King Chris, I'm actually going to take off. It was good seeing everybody. Thank you for being a part of this live. It's definitely time for me to go. I have to go make that video so I can entertain y'all, you know, because that's my duty. My job is to be a researcher at Yale, but I'm dedicated to all of you now. I have responsibilities. 30 years. Cool. Ciao. Yeah, I will look her up. You said Ginger what? Ginger Campbell. Okay, we're looking up Ginger Campbell now. I'll look for her podcast. Okay. Got her. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. I appreciate you all. You're good people, swell people. Thanks for all the support. Thank you for supporting my content. Be on the lookout for my new channel. In the next probably week, I might release it. Maybe 2 weeks. I'm not sure. Brain Science Podcast. I'm on it. All right. Thanks, friends. Much love. Peace.